Okay. Welcome everyone. So after a long time, so we are having like in a combined group event. So this is admin and a dev group. We are hosting this combined virtual group. And for today, we have Prague for the session. So myself, Karan Raj, I'm the one of the co-leader for the Salesforce developer group. I also have the Kritika. So she is also a co-leader for developer group. And we also have like an group leaders from the admin group, Sudha and Prasad also here. And we today we and for the today's sponsor, we have the Zoom sponsor Slalom. Slalom is sponsoring this for this session Zoom session. And Prague, he's kind of well known in the Twitter and the Salesforce community. He's an Salesforce MVP and Salesforce practice lead at Cloud Kettle. And he's also multiple time Dreamforce speaker, and he's also contributing multiple Salesforce Saturday kind of events. Like, welcome to the Toronto group, Prague, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Karan, and nice to be here. Good evening, everyone, and if you're joining from different parts of the world, good morning, good afternoon. First of all, thank you very much for having me today. What I'm trying to do today is to bring some of the knowledge and expertise which I learned, and also try to share with folks on security topic. And Karan did a fantastic job on giving about my profile, but I also do a little bit of intro talk track so that I will get with my flow. With no further ado, I'm going to go start sharing my screen, and I will set a little bit of ground rules at the beginning. And the reason it's going to be beneficial for me and also for everyone on the call. To start with, don't hold your questions if you are thinking that what I'm telling is stupid, or if you need a follow-up question on what I'm saying, feel free to put it on the chat, and we have moderators on the call today. So they will review all the questions, and they will walk me through the questions once I'm done with all the session, all the slides. And also I will provide a way you can connect with me after the session. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can always do reach me. Before I start, always remember that no question is a stupid question. The question what comes in your mind might be a question for someone else on the call today. So don't hesitate on asking any questions. And the purpose of us doing events like this is to not to educate, but also share our knowledge and experience. I may learn something from your questions, and that's vice versa. So feel free, it's going to be more conversational. I would like to see it that way. And don't hesitate to turn on your camera. It's going to be more friendly. And if you still hesitate not to, we highly appreciate that. Thank you very much. And let me go ahead and share my screen. Went on presentation mode. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. All right. So today's session topic is how you can become a data security champion for your org. You don't have to work for a consulting firm to be a data champion. You should. Doesn't matter whether you are touching one or multiple orgs on a regular basis. I'm going to walk through some of the processes and also guidelines which we have been trying to follow and also educate our clients. So it's going to be more like an recipe which I can share with you, and you can stretch it and also blend it as you want. And as Karan said, my name is Prag, and I'm in the Salesforce ecosystem for closer to 12 to 13 years. So the way I introduce myself in terms of how many years I'm in Salesforce is I am one of those folks who experienced pre-classic version of Salesforce, and I'm pretty sure most of the group leaders here are also having that many years of experience. So it was like way back where Salesforce used to look like and Visual Basic user experience, but it's still fantastic. We really loved it. So that's how I started my career. Started as a developer, became a consultant and architect for a very long time. And for the last many years, I'm acting as a Salesforce practice lead at a consultancy called Cloud Kettle in Halifax. I'm one of the recent MVP, joined the cohort 2022. Recently, I hit the mark of becoming an application architect, which was a long due, which I was just putting a delay on myself. But finally, I feel good. As Karan mentioned, I also do a lot of community events. To start with, when the Salesforce Championship program was pretty active. I was part of a Quip Champion, and that's how I know Fred. Fred is fantastic on Quip, and he can go in and around on Quip. And then I was also being part of a Trust Champion, which was powered by Salesforce security team, because I always showed passionate about learning and understanding Salesforce security. So I act as an MFA ambassador. So I have a little bit of traces of why you should use MFA in today's session. And those are all some of the community events and recognitions I got it from Salesforce. And I also do run a program called Salesforce Cohort, which is somewhat similar to Salesforce Saturdays, but the difference is it is more curriculum focused training for newbies who are getting into Salesforce. And I think at least one or two, I did see Vikram, you joined, but I don't see it in front of me. But Vikram is a fantastic example of joining an cohort and becoming an amazing Salesforce trailblazer and being pretty active and contributing for the last many years. So that's a little bit about me. And today, before I start the session, I would like to start it with a quote of, we live in a world where a data breach is not if, whether it's going to happen or not, it's going to be mostly like when, because we all are living in a digital era, and almost every company, if not at least 2 years before, everybody got a nail in the head that everybody needs to be on the digital world. And people are moving towards digital transformation. So you never know when it's going to happen, but you should be very cautious and take all the proper measures to be prepared for that situation. So most of the things what we are trying to understand today is slightly proportionate to the statement. To start with, I would like to call there are like 3 pillars you can think of when it comes to Salesforce security. To start with, the first one is user access. We'll go a little bit deeper on what user access mean, where you can add a little bit of friction to avoid some of the compromises. Then the second pillar is going to be record and data, which is like what kind of sharing and visibility can be provided on the record and data level. What are all the loose ends where you as an admin or a developer needs to understand before you code or before you configure anything in Salesforce. And the last pillar is going to be what level of system access you unknowingly providing to either third-party applications, which is talking to Salesforce, or either a community user who is trying to look into the Salesforce ecosystem. So those are all the 3 main pillars we will be discussing in today's session. To start with the user access, you don't have to give access to people they don't need. And when you as an admin or developer, when you think of full admin access, the first thing which comes in your mind is always, okay, if someone belongs to a system admin profile, then that's what it means. But the reality is not that. A reality is anybody who have any of those 6 permissions, which I highlighted here to start with, whether the profile have and manage user permissions, or the user have their permission through a permission set or a permission set group, or whether the user have delete record permission, or have the ability to reset passwords and unlock users, or able to log in as someone else, or create new permission sets and assign to them. Like those are all some kind of primary flags you have to understand and consider. And you probably have to run through to figure out whether the list of users who might be provided these permissions is required or not. So that is going to be the first check you have to do. And you should always treat yourself and also educate your organization that removing admin permissions is not related to the trust. It is related to decreasing the risk for the organization. It's going to benefit both you as a Salesforce org owner and also for the business users who are working on that Salesforce org. So you have to keep on educating that, because sometimes they will take it very personally that, okay, I used to have admin power or God's power and now it's been taken away from me. Did I make a mistake? Is it a punishment to me? Like they should not think it that way. They should feel it that, okay, I'm more luxurious way that I don't have any of those administrative permissions. And if I need anything, I'm going to ask someone and I'm going to get the answers for it. So that is the level of engagement you need to have with your own internal employees. Then the second one is enforce MFA. Again, Salesforce did a pretty good job of forcing everybody to turn on MFA for most of their orgs. And again, when Salesforce on a report, there's a little bit stat which says still there are more than 40% of the Salesforce orgs are not turned on for MFA, or at least in terms of not on the org level, but on the user level. But what I'm going to address is not just you or users who who are logging into Salesforce need to have MFA. It's even one step further, which is any other application which talks to Salesforce, and if you are authenticating to that application, should also have an MFA. A perfect example is if you are using a marketing automation tool or a customer success tool. I'm going to pick an example, which is Marketo. And if you're logging into Marketo, it's still going to talk to Salesforce and your user is authenticated. So if your user on Marketo get compromised, still the data leak is going to happen through Marketo, even though there is an MFA on Salesforce. So you should have a conversation with your IT team and also other product owners to understand and also encourage them to turn on MFAs for all the other applications which are talking to Salesforce. This is something which slowly Salesforce will bring it up in future, but this is a proactive way of you doing it. And also working closely with the IT team will also make them to realize that Salesforce as an organization and also application will let them to enable single sign-on. And if it is in the roadmap for your organization, make sure you encourage them to bring it up and show your interests in terms of turning your internal users start using SSO. Then the next pillar, what I want to discuss today is system access. Again, you also need to understand what level of system access you are providing to third-party applications which are talking to your Salesforce org. As an example, are you providing third-party applications to allow deleting any records within Salesforce? If that's the case, then you should start having a conversation with those providers and why you have to do it. Then the second one is, are you letting them to change or update user information? If so, then you have to cut down that. Then the third one is update transactional data, which is kind of complicated, and this might be applicable for certain industries, not for all industries. And as an example, if you are having, I'm just going to pick a random example. If you are in banking industry and if you have a transactional data within Salesforce, you should not allow any third-party application to directly apply on updating any of the information in the transactional database. You might have a secondary data table within Salesforce where you will apply it, and then you will have a system built internally within Salesforce where it will match and update between one table to other table. Again, that is very specific, but if you're working in an enterprise level, then an architecture will be in place which will be addressing it. But you need to understand so that you can pick those terminologies when you're having a conversation with a solution provider. It could be a consulting firm or it could be a third-party solution, but you have to think about it. And the last one, which is the most important one, I will also highlight it multiple times today, is access to personal identifiable information. One of the most expensive mistake you can make is letting anybody to steal personal identifiable information, which is owned by your company. I have a separate slide to talk about that and also how to reduce or mitigate those situations. So let's save that for a future slide. Then the next list of things which you need to understand when it comes to system access is how I can make it better by enabling allow listing for your Salesforce org. And I hope you know how to do it. And if you don't know, then you may have to reach out to the Salesforce team and they will enable it for your Salesforce org, which will help you to go much more deeper on what kind of connected apps you can let your end users to handle it and also use it with your Salesforce org. Then the next one is remove unused integrations and limit data access. So most of the bigger or older Salesforce orgs, we are always passionate and also we get the dopamine rush of creating something. But when it comes to expiring or also retiring, you always think, okay, that like we are not paying for that integration, so it's going to just stay there as is. But that is one of the primary reason where the data breach happens. So when the organization make a decision to turn off or to retire any product, make sure you as a Salesforce owner take proper measures or also add more friction to the process of removing it from your Salesforce org. Number 3 is uninstalled, expired, managed packages. Again, there might be a business use case you had in 2014 where you bought a product and install it on sale on your Salesforce org, might be used it for 2 or 3 years. A good example is there are so many data enrichment platforms. You might use a data enrichment platform 3 or 4 years before, and you figured out that's not helpful. You might have stopped paying it, but that app might still sit in your Salesforce org. Make sure you review it and remove it. Then the number 4 is dedicated integration user profile. Integration user profile, again, Salesforce is posting it for a very long time. And us as an organization implemented and probably spoke about that for multiple times. And what it is you are having a dedicated user license through a bot, which is going to talk between applications. And if you have a bigger Salesforce org, you may have multiple Salesforce bots considered as integration users who will talk between Salesforce and third-party applications so that you can able to track what is happening by which user and how you can add restrictions. And there are so and so you can able to add to that user profile. And a good example is you can make them as API only users so that even though that credential got leaked, like nobody as a human can able to log in through your login with salesforce.com or going to web page. It's highly impossible to do it. So try to add as many frictions as you can when it comes to providing access to systems which are talking to Salesforce. Then the third pillar, which is predominant and most commonly used and also requires attention, is record level access. And I want to share one of my experience working with a client recently. And what they said is they are spending so much money on acquiring a potential customer. So if they acquire a lead sitting in Salesforce, though it's marked as an unqualified lead for 5 quarters before, they still want to keep that information. And the reality is the acquisition cost is going to be comparatively way minimum if the data breach happens. Because when there is a data breach happens, you will pay based on the number of records that get compromised. So imagine that you have 200,000 records sitting in your Salesforce org and your org get compromised. You have to pay roughly, I think the average is $141 per record. And imagine like that is a number of times you'll be paying for 200,000 records. But at the same time, if you are having a data retention and also data deletion policy in place, and I hope you will have, otherwise I have a separate slide to talk about it, you need to go through it and also have a process in place so that you can remove unused or unnecessary information in your Salesforce org. So that way you're going to save much more price by deleting those rather than just acquiring and accumulating them in your Salesforce org. So always think about it, and mostly your marketing team and also sometimes your Salesforce team, sales team is pretty adamant that they are not going to encourage you to delete any of the records in Salesforce because they'll give you multiple reasons. And one of the reasons is it will create mess in their analytics. There are different ways you can handle it. You don't need their first name, last name, or personal identifiable information to go through the analytical piece. You can able to mask it, or there are multiple ways you can handle it still, which will not disturb your analytics. So you have to have an open and transparent conversation. And the better way to win that argument is by pulling a legal team as your a sponsor on those presentations, so that it's going to be much more easier for you to convince. Because by end of the day, as I said at the beginning of today's presentation, like you never know when the data breaches happen. You just have to be prepared. If it happens, how you can reduce the risk and also mitigate it in a better way. Then the second one is going a little bit deeper on the retention policy. And most of the organization is doing it in a much better way by engaging with the legal team and have a retention policy in place. And once they have a policy which is approved by the organization, then in Salesforce org, you can able to implement it either by going through a manual process of reviewing records. If you are a smaller org, you can go through a manual process and remove it. But if you are a bigger org and you have the resources to put an automation in place, you can also do an automatic data control on your Salesforce org. Excuse me. To follow that retention policy. So why this is very important is because if you are assigning this manually to a dedicated person that they have to run a report or run a batch on a weekly or a monthly basis to review it and then delete it, if they miss a particular week and the data breach happened, then it's going to be on the manual side of the business, rather than if you automate it, you can avoid those scenarios. So always think in a way where these are all the primary situations where you have to automate things. And I think there was an article released by IBM how important it is and how you can see it as an investment, because as I said in the previous slide, a cost per record you would be end up paying is closer to $140 to $160. Depends on what level of data breach happened in your org. So by doing all this, it's nowhere related to the way of saving those expenses in future. And when it comes to timeline, the timeline varies for each and every Salesforce objects where you are putting data retention. Usually when it comes to leads, you always want to store it for enrolling 13 months so that whenever you run like how the team performed in the last 12 months, because most of the marketing attribution or work towards the last 12 months, and also sales cycle works on most of the 18 months. So each and every day your Salesforce objects and also business model varies on those numbers, but make sure you have it streamlined working with the legal team, and always pick it on a rolling time period and not as a calendar time period. So that way you can be much more beneficial. And also when you build automation, it's going to be much more easier. Then how you can think about a potential loose ends when it comes to data access. To start with recycle bin, we always think that after you delete the record from Salesforce, it's gone. Though most of us, if not all of us, know that there is a temporary storage space called recycle bin where the data goes and stores it. When you're putting a retention and deletion policy, you have to think where you want to apply soft delete versus hard delete. And if it is something very specific about PIA, you should always go with hard delete so that it will be excluded from your recycle bin. Then the second one is Salesforce backups. Most of the bigger organizations will have one or multiple ways of having a data backup. And whenever you are putting a retention policy in place, you have to consider that as well. And it will play a major role when somebody requests a right to be forgotten, because when someone do that, then you have to pull the references of that potential client's information or persona information across all the platforms where they've been shared, and you have to pull it and then send it over to them and delete it from your org. So you need to know what kind of data backup solution you have and what kind of policies you need to have if somebody requests a right to be forgotten request. Then the third one is retention period for sensitive data. Again, some of the contracts you as a Salesforce owner might be having a conversation with your sales team or also operations teams to understand. Sometimes if it is a paid customer, but now they are an expired customer, but still their contract needs to be kept for a few years. Those are also pretty important for you. So you need to understand what kind of information or what kind of sensible information you have to keep it in Salesforce. That means you don't have to delete the entire record. You have to remove certain information about that particular record so that you fall under those sensitive and non-sensitive information which is stored in Salesforce. As an example, if somebody is going to pull my cell phone number without a first name or last name, there is no way they're going to reach out to me with any references. But so in that case, even though if you remove the first name, last name from my lead or contact information, even though a data breach happened, there's nothing they can do with my single information. So think about it when you're working between sensitive and non-sensitive, and also around the retention period. Then number 4 is drafts and duplicates. You obviously know there are so many duplicate records which can be created within Salesforce, and using Salesforce out-of-box functionality of matching and duplicate, things can be handled. But at the same time, when you are working with duplicate rules, there is a different set of records that gets created within duplicate data tables for those objects. So you have to consider and understand when you are cleaning up your Salesforce org, if a potential duplicate record set or record items has been created, you have to filter it and sift it to remove all those from your Salesforce org. Automatic deletion process, which is what I highlighted a little bit in the previous slide, where you have to invest more from a resource perspective once you finalize what kind of policy you want to put in place. And once it is approved, start putting most of those requests in an automatic deletion process way. And the last one is Salesforce sandboxes. I have a separate slide to talk about it. And the reason is some, if not most of the publicly traded companies are hesitating to provide production access to consulting firms or to contractors who are working with them, but they are pretty comfortable giving access to their full sandbox or even partial sandbox. What they are forgetting, or maybe it might be highlighted by some organizations and probably put in a restriction over there, but based on some of the scenarios where I have witnessed, they are comfortable giving access to full sandbox and partial sandbox and completely forgetting about the real client information, which is being shared and also copied to those sandboxes. So if you are one of those decision maker or part of a decision making committee, you should always think that whether you want to provide that level of access to the external employees who are helping you to build your business requirement. But if you're going to provide them, then there is no point of restricting them not to access your production data. I'm not telling you have to provide them system admin access, but there is no point of restricting them or being pretty adamant about not to give them production access, because one or the other way they are gaining client information. But at the same time, you can't restrict your organization not to give them sandbox access. Think about the different strategies, and Salesforce have a solution which is a paid version of data masking, and there are different ways they are doing it. To start with, I think there are 3 or 4 different ways you can handle those data masking. The one is like applying random characters. The second one is a similar mapping, which is more readable format, but there's no connection between the personal information, which is copied from production to sandbox. And sometimes you can even delete those sensitive data when a sandbox gets refreshed or created. So those are all different kind of solutions you have under data masking. But I think it goes under the Salesforce platform product, and you may have to pay for it. I don't know how much it costs, but if you are an organization where you are thinking of engaging multiple consulting firms, working on a very big problem, then a cost for you to spend on data masking is not huge. So you should also think about that as a solution. Then this is a tiny little feature which Salesforce gives, which is one of my favorite feature, is a transaction security policy, which is more running on the event basis. So anything which has happened on the transaction, you can apply some of those rules to restrict the end users to perform that action. So as an example, if I'm trying to run a report or run a list view where it has all date of birth or a cell phone number, then automatically this policy will fire in place, and I will get a notification saying like, you don't have this permission, reach out to an admin. And why you have to pay attention is most of the threat happens or because of having very less friction to the process. If I have a mindset of stealing information before I leave the organization, if I try to do it, and if there is a friction happen at the first chance, then I will not proceed forward to try to go through a different paths to steal the information. Because once I see it, I started feeling that someone is watching me, so I'll stop doing it. So this is a very good feature. And again, it is a paid version of Salesforce, but I think it's a fantastic way of implementing a lot of events which an end user can able to do to steal some information from your Salesforce out. And there are 2 different ways within the transactional security policy you can apply. If you are an admin, they have a fantastic condition builder where it's going to look exactly like a process builder or a flow, where you define all the conditions and you can set specific actions, whether you want to notify to a specific set of users or whether you just want to stop the end user to complete the transaction, what they are trying to achieve, etc., etc. There are, I think there are like 10 or 12 different actions you can able to do using just the condition builder. But at the same time, you can write Apex and get the benefit of building your custom functionality on the platform level, which can be still applied as a transactional security policy. Again, this is a small feature, but once you get into it, it's a pretty vast subject and you can go in and around, and there's so many things you can do using transactional security policy. Now let me move on, and moving forward, there are like 4 or 5 slides where I have is mostly like a note-taking session for you folks, where you can make note of these questions and habits and set of actions what you may have to think about before you start treating yourself as an data security champion. To start with, these are the 4 questions which you should never hesitate to ask your stakeholders or to ask your IT team or to ask anybody who is more on the decision-making stage. To start with, the first one is why we are storing sensitive information about our clients in Salesforce. Most of the time, the organizations are tracking the information just because they have a placeholder in Salesforce, and there is no much limitations in terms of how many number of columns or how many number of fields you can capture. And most of the marketers would like to grab as much information as they can so that it can be provided as a value add for the sales team. But you as a Salesforce owner needs to think whether this information makes sense, or even though if it makes sense, do I have to store it in Salesforce, or can I store it in a different org and I can able to access it only on a request basis? So you have to think through it and ask those questions to those business owners, will also make them to think whether they want to even start capturing those informations in Salesforce. So that is the question you should always ask, regardless of who you are working with, or now whatever the scenario you are. And if you already have those information in Salesforce, don't even hesitate to set up a meeting and start asking through those questions moving forward. Then the second one is what kind of process or automation we are going to build on top of these sensitive information. A good example is if you are building an automated email service from your Salesforce org, and by mistake, if you are creating an automation where it's going to gather most of the personal information, let's say it's going to start gathering information about Karan and it's going to send it over to me, then it is like it's a forceful data breach you made because of the automation you built on the sensitive data you captured within the Salesforce org. So you have to be very, very careful in terms of what kind of automation has been built on those sensitive information that's been captured in Salesforce. Then the third one is what is the deletion process for write to be forgotten requested in both live and backup systems? As I said, that is one of the primary question that needs to be answered, not by the product owners, but by the legal team, because that is a very clean slate where you have to follow a process which is given to you. Do not make a single assumption of what you can do to either make it as an automated way or whether you can skip one or two steps because it's a pretty boring laundry list of things you have to do. Don't even take a single chance when it comes to right to be forgotten, because there are so many compliance around the world. And if you are an organization who is doing global business, this is very, very important for you. And the price you may pay for the mistake is something which you can't afford. So think about it. This is one of the primary takeaway, which in my opinion, you have to have it in place. Then the last one is, are there other integrated systems we need to consider, which is in terms of what kind of personal information you are sharing to third-party information. A good example is in a scenario where you are capturing personal information through a web form, which is funneling to Salesforce, but you are talking to a third-party application where you are sharing that PII information to the third-party application. And if there is a data breach happen, even that org, you are still responsible for it because you are the primary receiver and the creator of those PII information. So you have to be very careful what kind of integration techniques you are using and what kind of information you are passing on to the third-party applications. And even what are all the different mechanisms of storing those information secured in the third-party application. So these are all some of the questions, and the list may go long, much more longer based on what kind of industry you're working with. But these are all some of the primary information you have to know, regardless of the industry you work for. Then the next one is some of the key customer control security measures. I just classified into 4 different sections. To start with, you have when you're thinking of security, it's not just one layer, it's multiple layer within this or within your Salesforce org. You should always go on a bigger scale first, which is organization wide, where you will apply multi-factor authentication. Do not allow anybody not to have a multi-factor authentication. If they are working in a place where they can't able to take their smartphone, there are different ways you can apply multi-factor authentication. Make sure they are not giving any reasons not to use MFA to log into Salesforce. Then the second one is password policies. That is something you should always revisit once every particular timeline to make sure that it is well aligned with your overall organization's goal when it comes to password policies. Then the third one on an organization level is if you have a chance and if you have a bigger IT team, don't even hesitate to start a conversation or make that conversation work for you in favor of turning on single sign-on, so that you as a Salesforce owner don't have to worry about authentication and user issues. Then the second category is persona, where you will provide access through profiles, permission sets, and also permission set groups. So that is where you will identify what kind of metadata access I can provide, what kind of user experience access I can provide, and how I can restrict it on the user experience level so that it will be very well aligned over there. Then the third one, which is predominantly on the record level sharing, and you always start with OWD and always think, and again, this is something which you might be following in today's world, but if not, make sure you always start from more restricted way in an organization by default, which is start with private, and then based on the requirement, you can slowly start opening up based on different features, which was built within Salesforce by using the hierarchy or by using sharing rules or by manual sharing or even programmatic sharing. Like there are multiple ways you can slowly open up those windows, but it's very hard to shut something which is already open at the base level. So you should always think about it. And there is a time frame where you have to go back and look into how the record sharing has been implemented in your Salesforce org. Then the last one is field level security. People always underestimate, again, based on my experience, that field level security is not something they have to worry about. And they always try to check when they are creating fields because it's much more easier where there's like one checkbox. Again, I don't know why Salesforce made it that way, but it's much more easier to turn off for all the profiles and then they move on to the next step. Make sure you're not doing it and try to pay closer attention to field level security because there are multiple ways anybody can get access to the field which you think you're removed from page layout. Then some of the habits. Again, one of my favorite book, what I read during pandemic is Atomic Habits, where they talked a lot about how you have to set something as an habit so that you won't force yourself to do it. And that is something which I want you to think when it comes to following some of the habits for security in particular. And when it comes to habits, of course, you have to do it in a specific time period. And here I'm just classifying it into weekly. What are the list of things you have to do it on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, and an annual basis? To start with weekly, you have to start analyzing how the data is getting stored in Salesforce. As an example, whether it's hitting your storage limit, whether it's actually there is a spike in terms of creating any records or deleting any records and who's doing it. At least spend a couple hours a week understanding how your Salesforce is performing as a whole. And then the second one is start looking into login histories. Try to understand, is there any user who's supposed to log in from Mexico when your whole organization is purely based on Canada and there is no business or there is no business user who would be expected to work from Mexico until unless there is a special ask. Because those are all the certain ways you can easily start flagging if a particular user's account has been breached. And at the same time, if there are specific users password get locked or if they are getting too many invalid password registry in their login history, make sure you check with them and try to understand from where they are logging and whether there's a potential data breach happen through that user credential. Then the third one is look into audit logs and export it from an event perspective and try to see how the audit logs looks like, whether everything is as per your expectation or something is slightly indicating that an attention requires. Make sure you spend that quality time understanding about this. Those are something which you have to do it on a weekly basis. If you as a person or a responsible person of your Salesforce org don't have enough time to do it, make sure you delegate those activities and do and follow up with your team members or ask them to give you an update once every week. Then moving on to the next timely action you may have to take it on a monthly basis is sync with the IT team. I know IT team is very hard to work with. I'm not complaining and I'm apologizing in advance if there is someone who is joined today's call whose main job is an IT person in your firm. But what I'm trying to say is IT people are like military where they have rules and regulations and they are trained to say no for any kind of request, but it's always good for you. So always have a monthly half an hour to 45-minute conversation with your IT team, try to understand, because their job is to understand how many data breaches are happening in the world, what are all the different channels, what are all the different ways that you can secure your product or environment. So have a conversation with them on a monthly basis and try to understand how you can improve the security for your Salesforce org. Then the second one is review your MFA. Make sure that any of your users didn't turn off their MFA or remove their permission set where you are enforcing them to have an MFA or disable their MFA. If that's the case, you have to let them know that, hey, you can't turn it off. Make sure that you have it. And most of the time it happens when those users are sharing their credentials. If I, as a consulting firm working for an organization, if I have 4-member team, the organization may not able to afford to provide me 4 different user licenses. So what I would end up doing is to share my credentials with other team members, and it's going to be very hard if we have an MFA. So sometimes they may get an excuse, but make sure you don't allow them to have it. Then the third one is password policies. You have to, again, follow some of the strict rules which Salesforce provides in terms of, okay, don't allow them to reuse their password. You set a 60 days or a 90-day password change, and not a 30-day password change. And I had a very interesting conversation with one of the product owner at Salesforce when I asked why they are not encouraging users to have a password reset in a very short span. And the reason is, once you are asking your end users to change the password every 30 days, then what they're going to start doing is they're going to start having their password as the month. As an example, if I have to reset every 30 days, then what I will do is I'll start putting my password as August 2022, which is pretty easy for anybody to make a guess and try to sneak into that. So don't have very short span of password reset policy, but at the same time, don't allow anybody to use the same password for a year or for 6 months. Okay, make sure you pick something and also work with IT team and understand what kind of password policies they are establishing and try to implement the same in your Salesforce org. And the last one is network access. Sometimes some of your team members will work with IT team and provide you a dedicated IP ranges to let them allow it as a trusted IP so that they don't have to go through the identification process. That's totally fine, but make sure you always review, reset, and also delete on a monthly basis. If someone else, and I think most of the organizations registered trusted IP ranges with the name associated with it. As an example, if a consulting firm is giving their netting IP range, then you will have the consulting firm's information and you will give a start and the end IP range, and check with them whether they are still within the same IP range, or you want to update it or you want to delete it. So that is also a monthly reoccurring activity you have to do. Then let's move on to the quarterly. To start with a quarterly review, make sure you look into the list of queue members and also public group members you might have created a year before or 2 years before or 5 years before, because those are all also different ways you can let people to access Salesforce records in Salesforce. A good example is if you are using an app like in Lean Data, where queue members can be added and removed, and that will be directly proportionate to do and round robin when there is a lead created or when there is an opportunity created. But at the same time, you don't have the luxury of using any of those products. And if you are using a custom solution and you're assigning it to an inbuilt queue, the chances of you going and removing a queue member is very limited. You'll be always interested in adding queue members because you always get a request from the business user saying, hey, we added 5 more team members and I want these 5 team members to be added in Q1, but they won't tell that who is removed from that queue and being assigned to a different team or a different product. So always review those queues and work with the queue owners and make sure that the queue members are being well maintained. That's the same thing applied to public groups. And then the second point is run health checks, which is pretty free. Salesforce actually provides you the power of looking through how your Salesforce health looks like and start running it and try to understand how it looks like. And Salesforce makes a lot of changes in that health check report, and look into that and try to understand whether you can apply some of those in your Salesforce org to increase the performance of your org or the security of your org. And the last one is clear activations. I think you might be familiar with 2 different activations that will be stored in Salesforce. One is the browser activation and the other one is the IP activation. And if you don't know, you should go and search for activations in your setup screen. And the recommendation is to delete it once every quarter. And what it does, it just tracks that you logged in through this particular browser. And you might be experienced personally that if you are using a new laptop and you are trying to log into Salesforce, the first time it will send you a 6-digit code, which is not MFA, which is completely different. Just a 6-digit code sent to your email. What it does, it on the Salesforce side, it will track it as an activator for that browser. So make sure you go and delete those activations once every quarter. And the last one, which again, it's a little bit bigger exercise to do, but it pays much more value for your business and also the Salesforce org, which is reviewing your roles, which is huge pain. But at the same time, you have to pay attention to the list of roles you have and what kind of structure it's been defined, and have an open conversation with your business leaders and try to see whether any of those rules has been deprecated. And if that's the case, you have to remove it, because all those going to directly apply to your sharing model. It's going to help you increase the efficiency of your Salesforce org. Then the second one is field level security. Make sure you check and provide the right access to the right profiles. And the last one is data sharing, which is more focused towards the sharing model, the manual sharing, and also the programmatic sharing. There are a few things which we can go much more deeper on how the manual sharing has been done, what kind of share records you can delete from those shared Salesforce records. There are multiple ways you can handle it, and that's when you will work very closely with your developers and also try to understand how it's being built internally, so that you can start applying it. And you can able to achieve a lot of things what I'm covering through automated way using the power of Salesforce platform. I know I talked a lot today. It's going to be much more harder to digest everything, but at the same time, I just highlighted some of the key takeaways for you folks for today, which is to start practicing doing health checks. Second one, if you don't have an integration user, make sure you march towards that and try to implement an integration profile and then an integration user. There is a huge difference between creating an integration user under system administrative profile versus defining an integration profile and an integration user. If you are not clear about it, feel free to let me know and I can able to help you with it. But those are two different things. Don't ever create an integration user under system administrative profile. It's going to create so much mess than what it is today. So be cautious before you do that. Then the third one is audit and delete packages. Make sure you go through, understand what kind of install packages you have and see whether you want to keep it or deprecate it. And if you're going to deprecate it, there is another way you can able to remove all the information from your Salesforce org. If you want to keep it, you can still keep it, but make sure you do that. And the fourth one is enabling allo listing, which is not a huge task for you. You just have to submit a request to Salesforce and they will enable it for your org. And the last one is work with your legal team to understand what is the data retention and data policy. And if you don't know where to start with, and if you don't have one, that's the link. You can take a picture of it. And we have a well-built template hosted on our CloudCradle website. Feel free to download it. And the last one, that's it for now. I'm going to stop talking. I know I talked a lot, but it's time for you folks to ask questions. As I said at the beginning, no question is a stupid question. Please ask as many questions as you can and as you want until Prashant says it's time, let's stop. So I can definitely answer as much as I can. But at the same time, if you didn't come up with a question today, feel free to stay connected with me. I tried to do my best giving answers instantly. Otherwise, I'll take some time and provide you. And again, it was a pleasure sharing thoughts and ideas. And thank you so much for patiently listening all the bullshit I was throwing at you folks.
This was really, really amazing. Huge thanks once more on behalf of our groups as well as the entire community. This is, I think, it's not just one of those things you learn through Trailhead or you learn through just doing on a developer org. These are things which have come through experience, and it's really valuable. So again, huge thanks. And yes, there seem to be questions as well as some good discussions. So you definitely triggered a lot of thought process. So I try to go through them in sequence. But if anyone feels like I've missed out the question, feel free to unmute and ask a question. So we'll start at the beginning. So Myron talked about like the Salesforce health check decreases the org score when they have login as any user enabled, but it seems to be a necessary feature, especially for sysadmins. So obviously we've seen that a lot during testing and things like that. So I guess this is which, if you have any thoughts on that, Prag, and if anyone else also wants to share, definitely an interesting point.
Yeah, no, 100%. I can definitely share my opinion about health check. As I said, health check comes with 100%. It's highly impossible to hit 100%. You need to pick where you want to take your stack. So if you want this permission and you think it's going to add much more value and reduce the wastage of time for your end users if they struggle, then have it turned on. And even though if you're down by 10%, that's totally fine. You're still at the upper scale of being a 90% superior good. So don't even worry. And that's the other part. When it comes to security, you don't have to be 100%. But make sure you are at the upper scale, like between 80 to 100, which is like a prime space to be. And if you're there, you should be proud of yourself.
And just a related note on that, in one of my previous implementations, a project I worked for a customer, I had a lot of data access. For that, I had to go through HIPAA compliant training and show the certification to the client and as well. So obviously, it's part of like what you're saying, recognizing where the gaps are, where you have access to data, and being educated about it, and not just sort of trusting in God and the admins who have developed the system. So that's where we are. So anybody else has any thoughts on that? Awesome. I think there was a question from Prakash on who pays the price. I think that got answered by Chris. And then scrolling down, there's a good discussion. I think Ramesh, Kavya, Fred, now again Myron, talking about broadly about retaining lead details, which are fairly old. One from what's really the implication, real life example from a data breach perspective, and also what are other ways to handle these, like we can exclude them from some of the analytics and so on. So already some good discussion, but anything you want to add?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, well, my entire career for at least the last 5 or 6 years is directly working with sales, and predominantly I was working with Sales Cloud and working with sales leaders. The saying is, if you don't know how to sell to a person in 12 months, that person is a dead person to you. So what's the point of storing that information? Period, full stop. Right? Like that is an indicator. And if somebody is coming to you as an Salesforce owner saying like, okay, hey, why we have to remove it? I'm going to sell it. If they didn't sell it for the first 12 months, then that's done. The person who showed interest is not going to keep that interest as is after 12 months. If I'm interested in buying a Honda car and I submitted an application 12 months ago, I'm not going to stay till 12 months to get another car. Like if you didn't respond, if you didn't convince me to buy your car, then I would have been probably owning a different car. So there is no point of holding any of those leads. So that's why you always need to have a 13-month rolling period of leads to track how the performance, the marketing, and also the sales performance did, because that's directly proportionate to analytics, and that's how most of the marketing team will be paid at. But after that, it's a dead information. There is no point of having it in Salesforce. That's my opinion. And that's also most of the sales leaders I work with told me. And that's how we defined the Salesforce org. But I'm open to have a conversation on that note if somebody have any specific use case. Yes, Ramesh, go ahead.
Hi, Parag. Thank you for that. Actually, let's say we have one system, like especially for the booksellers, like they want to, even though they didn't purchased any recent publication from that author, but still they want to keep all the previous buyers list, even though they are 2-3 years old, because maybe in future, like one of the book, they might like it and they just want to keep them in loop, so they don't want to delete their details. You have any comments?
That's a very valid point, and that is a different scenario, right? Like they already made a transaction, which means they are considered as your customer, and depends on your industry, you can keep your customer, right? Like there are customers who won't considered as a former customer based on the industry you work with. Right. So as an example, if it is an healthcare industry, most of the customers over there, they won't be even customers, they are called as patients. But when it comes to this terminology, they are called as customers. They won't be considered as a former customer until unless they move out of the province, or until unless they, like that is going to change. But in your case, what you explained, they are a paid customer of your business, and you should keep them to nurture them for a future potential buying opportunities for them.
And I think also just to add on to that, it's very important, like the point you made about the industry and how the sales cycle works. So for example, if you're in the taxation industry, like a company like H&R Block, you will probably have just 2-3 months of real peak activity. So if you have leads there, even if they're old for 10 months, you still valid, because in that 10-month period, they may really not be buying anything, right? So that's again a very important point.
Exactly. And at the same time, sorry, I will add one more point and then let's move on to the other question is, that's when the Salesforce Shield comes into picture, where you are adding an additional layer of encrypting the personal identifiable information, but even though if a data breach happens, there is way less chances, like 0.0001%, they also get an encryption key to encrypt and steal that information. So again, I did not go through, and that's why I love security topic, because you can go as deep as you can. But this is a perfect example where you can have a different solution in place to keep that information in Salesforce and not to worry about data breach.
Excellent. Next question from Ramesh, and this probably you can even take it offline if it helps, is could you share some resources on how to use condition builders, and are there any default templates available for this?
Sure, yeah, 100%. I think there is a good platform demo video. Again, it's a Salesforce resource. I tried to find it, but it's not on the website. It's on offsite, but I could able to pull it for you. Try to reach out to me on LinkedIn and I will share it with you.
Next, Fred is asking, has anyone used the free the text encrypted field format? I'm not sure if it's worth it, as he believes that there are real limitations to the use of the field. So open to anyone.
Fred, I'm sorry, I never used it, but I'm happy to hear if somebody else used it.
Looks like we've all got some homework to do.
I want to mention, I did see that you can actually access the value in flows. So I was curious about that, like what automations you could, as system user, access the values, especially for just checking null or a change, which is the kind of thing you'd want to be able to check in an automation.
Got it.
But it's just not visible to the users who can't see encrypted information, and it can't be used as filters in reports and list views, which is appropriate.
Got it.
I feel like they retired that field after the platform event came in. I don't think, is it still available? I doubt.
It's very old, and
Yeah.
like a lot of old things, that's why it's still free. But it is there. I mean, at least I've seen it. I just have not actually used it, so I was curious.
Yeah.
Okay. I think you've raised some interesting things for us to think about, Fred. So thank you for that. Okay, next one from Meena. Is there any limitation for notifications on emails and transaction policies? It's because she noticed that there are, in group emails, you don't get notification emails, only the individual users get emails.
That's a good question, because most of those notifications, if it is related to that transactional denial, it's directly related to an individual email address. So that's a quite interesting one. Let me look into that and probably get back to you.
What an amazing audience here, Prag, for you.
Seems like a lot of homework to do for sure.
Excellent. Next one from Catherine. Is there a way to report on who used the login as user and when and who they logged in as? And see, Chris replied as you can view them the audit trail. Just wondering if there are other ways as well.
I don't think so. I think that's the most easiest and the fastest way you can do it. But if you're using an analytical platform, which is something which is very interesting, where I have witnessed in one of a bigger client we worked with, they track a lot of information from an audit perspective, which will be passed on to an analytical platform. And there are some bigger organizations who are even using tools like Splunk to review it and get flagged. And if someone is not expected to log in as a CEO to look into information, then that will be flagged. So there are multiple ways you can handle it, but I think if you're asking me from an Salesforce administrative or a developer perspective, the easiest and the better way of doing it by running report, as Chris mentioned.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Chris, as well for that. Next two-part question from Prakash is one, I'm sure you love this question, is which is when you have multiple third-party apps, what's better, to use a single integration user or one integration user per the third-party app? And if it's the latter, can they all have the same profile? I'm sure this is a pet topic for you, so I'll let you have the
Yeah,
floor.
yeah, 100%. Actually, I'm very happy and proud of Prakash because his thought process in the right way. So congratulations, Prakash. That's how you should think. But when it comes to third-party applications, you can at least group those applications based on the requirement. So as an example, if you are using two different marketing automation tools, one is in Marketo and also the other one is Outreach, you can probably use a similar integration user to handle both of those requirements. But at the same time, if you are using a data enrichment platform and then in marketing automation platform, then you may have to use different users. And also some of the third-party applications will recommend you to have a dedicated user. And the reason is it's going to be much more important for you to build any automation to exclude that user if that user is creating any events. So as an example, if there is an update happening by that particular marketing automation user, then you should exclude any of the transactional automation you want to achieve that may trigger an email or that may trigger a financial update to an external system. So some of the bigger and better established third-party applications will recommend you to have a dedicated user. But in general, if you want to move from stage 0 to stage 1, where you don't have any integration user and move to implementing an integration user, start finding some of the bigger third-party integration tools and use that same integration user to connect to Salesforce.
Awesome, that's very comprehensive. So next question, I know you touched upon it, is from Shireen, but it's definitely worth reiterating. Why should we not use the sysadmin profile as an integration user? And is it okay to create two integration users, one in admin and one in API profile? So definitely, I think worth reiterating. This is very, very important.
Yeah, integration users should never be in system administrative user. Because as a system administrator user, we call it as God's power. You can delete that entire org if you have system administrator user. So you should never let an integration user to have to be a system administrator profile user. Okay, and the other reason you being an integration user is you never needs to export any of the reports. You never need to log in through an UI experience. The benefits of having a dedicated integration user is most of the MFAs or password policies are excluded for integration users, because every single time you are forced to change the password for integration user, you have to go and apply through multiple platforms, and it's going to be a huge pain for you to maintain it. And the maintenance cost is also high. And also think that if it breaks during an office hours, and if you're working for a bigger organization, just because of that tiny little mistake of creating an integration user and a system administrator profile is going to blow up. So people who might have done it may not have the job anymore. So it is that hard if you make that mistake. So never ever think of creating an integration user, assign it to a system administrative profile. I think that answers the first one. Then the second one is, I don't see why you need to provide an integration user and non-API user, because the purpose, the definition of integration user is to integrate and act as an authenticator. Consider as a certificate, but you're giving it to a user license to talk to different systems. And in that case, why that user has to be an API only user is something I don't understand, but you have a valid reason or scenario, I'm happy to address that.
Hopefully that answers the question. So one more came in from Myron. I think it's getting replied on, but there could be some additional points. Is what's the best way to back up your org's metadata? I know Prakash talked about creating a new sandbox, but it's probably not direct to your topic. But if you want to just share thoughts, or anybody else wants to add on, please definitely.
Yeah, I think there are so many paid versions. There are so many non-paid versions. You can, if your organization lets you to keep it in a local repository, or you're going to keep it in a virtual machine but on a local, like there are so many ways you can handle it. when it comes to storing metadata, but also there's a caveat in terms of every time when there is a change in your metadata, how you're going to store it. So the better way is probably you can store it in a version control system, which your company is already paying for. But again, you have to have a policy in place, whether it's going to be updated on a regular basis, or which one you consider as a backup, whether are you considering your production metadata as a backup or your full sandbox as a backup. There are like so many edge cases which needs to be addressed before you pick one solution. But also I have recently get to know that most of the data backup solutions comes with metadata backup as well. So if you are paying products like OwnData or Odessa, they also comes with metadata backup solutions. So you may already have an answer for your question. So, but that's my point, but I don't have to be the only person to answer that question.
Yeah, I think most of them are using like bigger companies. They are using like Bitbucket or version controlling system. And if you are using like Salesforce CLI, you will be more into the source-based development rather than the sandbox or like an org-based development. So like if you're looking like in a backups and the development, so the best way is you start using the CLI. So start from your repository rather than developing in your sandbox, relying on the production as your metadata, rely on your source repository as a metadata for your implementation.
Awesome.
That's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one final one from Rose should be fairly straightforward. If a consulting company has multiple staff accessing the org, is the recommendation to have separate logins and use MFA? Good to argue with this.
It's a tricky one. And it's going to be a conversational, and I don't have a direct answer for it. So it's completely based on what the organization can afford. So if the organization can afford to provide individual user license for all those users who are representing the consulting firm, that is the way you have to go. But at the same time, if the organization can't afford, or if the consulting firm can't afford a single person working for your firm for 40 hours a week, then they may have to blend multiple resources to work on the project to hit the deadline. Then yes, you may have to give a single user to that consulting firm, but make sure you are giving them on the sandbox level. And if it is on the sandbox level, you can turn off some of the business users and provide them a dedicated user licenses. But when it comes to production, you have to let them know there's only 1 or 2 people who can log into their production to make any of the changes or anything they want to do, so that you can still go through the policies. And the reason I'm a little bit hesitant on giving a direct answer is, if you go to Salesforce agreement, the direct answer is you should never share your credentials. So that the scenario is already rolled out. So you can't even get into that scenario if you go through that agreement. But I understand what you're asking is a real life question. But there are different ways you can handle it. As I said, give individual users for all the people who are working on that project from the consulting firm on the sandbox level. But when it comes to production, make sure you limit it to 1, or if you have to give 2, make sure you do that investment of giving those 2 individual licenses for them. And if they shared it internally, then they are responsible for any kind of data breach, and they will pay millions and millions of dollars.
Awesome. And I think that should cover it. Again, thanks for all the people who've been actively sort of contributing and conversing. Lovely, healthy discussion. Most of the other comments are, again, thanking you, which I definitely would echo, Prag. This has been an absolute wonderful session. I'll just maybe give a couple of minutes if anybody has any final questions, since we have the man of the moment. We don't want to lose him. We can always connect with him. But if anybody has any questions, give you a count to 3 to unmute and ask. All right, I skipped the count. I think everybody's got enough of knowledge to ponder over and think and homework to do as well. But again, on behalf of all the groups and everybody in the community, this was an absolutely amazing session. Very, very invaluable, especially shows all the real life scenarios and examples what we all will face and see. So it's not just those things which we can pick up a textbook and learn. So Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time and effort you and thought you put into this for us. So again, huge thank you.
Thank you very much, Prashant. Thank you, Prashant, Karan, Siddha, and Kritika for giving me that opportunity. And also Neil, sorry Neil, if you are seeing it, definitely address your name. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And it's a pleasure to meet everyone who joined here. I know it's summer. I don't know how the weather is in Toronto or from the area where you joined. Thank you for sacrificing your evening. This shows that how dedicated you are in learning and understanding Salesforce security, and I'm pretty happy to see the crowd and also happy to answer some of the questions, if not all. And I'm happy to be connected. And if you have any question, feel free to reach me and I'm happy to answer. Thank you once again for everyone.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, everyone.